Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And this is going to be a bit of a different episode that's compiled together, mostly because a lot of these have been put out in individual, slightly longer form videos. But I also know that some people prefer the amalgamation together, so I figured I'd keep up with the trend. So in other words, let's get on the pulse. Before we go any further, if you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be extremely grateful. These sort of compilations, actually I have no idea if this is going to get a little bit more spread, given that it is a longer video and YouTube tends to prioritize those. We will have to see. But beyond that, if you want to make sure this gets shared out or just get around with some of the names, it might not get that much traction in the algorithm. We will have to see. But now on to the matter at hand. We got 8 projects on the docket. Let's start off with, we have from Randy Rogers and Wade Bowen, Hold My Beer, Volume 3. Look, at this point with this duo, you should know the formula. Loose and likable, neo-traditional Texas country, either built for the barroom sing-alongs, or about being the guys making loose and likable neo-traditional country. With the only surprise this time is that it's a 6-song EP and not a full-length album. And while I think the high watermark of their first collab back in 2015 is quite safe, the tighter construction keeps the formula pretty fresh and free of all filler, and avoids some of the production issues that unfortunately cropped up on Wade Bowen's album last year. It definitely is colored by some backwards-looking nostalgia and a couple of the more melancholic moments, and as much as Shooting Hand is an extended joke song, let's be honest, it absolutely plays to some of that same sort of machismo, but it also never becomes obnoxious or overbearing by Texas country standards, and I'm also aware I'm fully nitpicking at this point, especially as this is a duo that is so riotously willing to invite everybody to this party should they want to go. The list of name checks on We Ain't the Only Ones, that was kind of wild. But let's be real. We're on volume 3 of an incredibly consistent duo, and while you won't really get any surprises if you know these two, if you seek this out, you're going to get exactly what you're looking for at their high standard of quality. It's great stuff, it's a fun listen, check it out. We have from the Aces, I've Loved You for So Long. So what's frustrating about the Aces is that they got a formula that should absolutely work for me in terms of their synth-inflected vocal harmonies and the go-for-broke hooks, but that 2020 album I reviewed didn't leave that much of an impression, and now back with this, okay, imagine a throwback power pop girl group emulating Hatchie and Wolf Alice by way of Muna, with a couple extra fuzzy guitar solos and a more limited production budget, which is likely why this doesn't have the texture, groove, or punch that it really should, and you have this. In other words, the Aces have streamlined much of their experimentation for something that's a little shorter, a little punchier, and a little closer to their new wave pop rock roots, albeit with a couple weedy spurts of modern synth and pitch-shifted vocals to feel more current, and it doesn't really add that much. You can tell that the song structures here are calibrated to go viral, likely on TikTok. Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if that happened at some point, and good for them. But considering all these songs breeze by pretty quickly, still lacking a lot of distinctive detail in the songwriting about the queer relationship drama and mid-20s burnout, and yet when even at their best, their influences still blaze through all the brighter, I don't know. The Aces are a band that feel torn across all of their influences without finding a core that makes them feel special or unique to me. And when the seeds of good vocal arrangements and hooks are here, that's frustrating. I mean, this has got its moments. Girls Make Me Wanna Die is kind of legit sweet. I dig the smoldering, exasperated mess of Person. Attention is a deceptively nasty breakup song that is a complete swerve against the jaunty melody and production, but few of these are legit great. If you like the style of power pop, you'll probably enjoy this, but you've also probably heard it done better. All I'm saying. We have from the Japanese House, In the End, It Always Does. So you can add the Japanese House, the stage name of Amber Bain, to the synth-heavy, ethereal indie pop breakouts of 2019 that I was very late on hearing, and yet I'll admit of that group, her debut, Good at Falling, didn't really click for me. The hooks didn't quite pop as strongly. The arrangements hit a weird middle ground of pleasantly tasteful and just a twinge awkward, and while the writing was quite good, I was never really quite gripped. So I wanted to give her sophomore album the proper try, And this may sound weird, but here it goes. The reasons I like this more seem to be the exact reasons some other folks are a lot cooler on this, but I'm still not quite won over. Now this is due to a shift in production from BJ Burton, not Danger Mouse the other one, and his wonkier synth palette to something much cleaner, groovier, and more polished from George Daniel, who has a much heavier presence this time around with the padded percussion, the chirpy, pitch-shifted vocals, the glossy but rickety acoustics, and all the twinkling atmosphere. And here's the thing with that sound. It raises the floor of the quality, and the compositions pop a little bit better. It's coming from a producer of the 1975, it better, but it also translates to this sleepy, drippy comfort zone that's been overexposed in recent years, especially given how much Bane's vocals remind me of a midpoint between Boy Genius and Charlie Adams, except run through more synthetic filters to accentuate her presence and occasionally sidechain to the rest of the instrumental so they clip at odd intervals and don't quite feel as smooth as they should with this production style. That being said, like with Good at Falling, I think the writing ultimately saves this. Bane has such a knack for soft focus but sexually layered relationship drama, collapse, and queer yearning that even if I don't love most of her tonal and mastering choices, there's this winsome romance and heartbreak that translates depth through all the little moments so they don't feel so precious or twee. Now I know it's obviously not intended for me, but I can still appreciate it. That being said, while this is a slow burn that will grow on you, there is a part of me that listening that just wants a new Shura album, and it's hard to ignore how there are so many others in this space right now who utilize this production palette a bit more effectively. I still feel a bit at a distance. It's certainly good. It's got a recommendation, just maybe not great. We have from ANOHNI, My Back Was a Bridge for You to Cross. So let's clean up some old business. I really did not like ANOHNI's solo album Hopelessness back in 2016. That review got a ton of backlash, so I did go back to the album for this. And yeah, I still don't like it. I get that it was a different time and leftist discourse has evolved significantly since, but the self-flagellating and often defeatist nihilism felt extremely tasteless. The examination of global politics and societal issues can be ham-fisted, contradictory, and awkwardly pompous. I didn't think that her delivery worked for the material at all, and while the production's actually aged pretty well, it just was not enough to save it for me. That said, this is her first full length since then, features a reunion with her old band The Johnsons, heavily inspired by Marvin Gaye. I wanted to give ANOHNI another proper shot, and this is one of those tricky cases because while it is an improvement, it's less experimental, but I'd argue it succeeds in what it's trying to do. I still don't really like it, and once again, it's rooted in the lyrics and themes. For what it's worth, the politics are more predominantly in the subtext and more focused on the environmental causes, the damage that we are doing to the world at large, and grappling with climate grief, reflecting how things have changed so very little since Marvin Gaye wrote about climate change 50 years ago. And I get how it could feel cleansing to wallow in some pure depressive doomerism that by the end you're then inspired to fight. But there are some reasons I don't feel that from this project, and it's rooted in issues that I've had with ANOHNI since Hopelessness. The writing paints in very broad strokes. It feels very individualistically framed when we know that climate change is driven off of the global megacorporations and late capitalist thirst for short-term profits rather than a lot of the individual responsibility, in which ANOHNI feels paralyzed and complicit, only just starting to break free. And yeah, the self-sacrificial, defeatist pessimism drives me nuts. There are systemic answers and solutions. We've known about many of them for decades, and the urgency to use them is rising. It's a matter of mustering iron will, doing the hard work, and then getting the explosives. Granted, my personal Overton window is considerably wider than hers, and it's not saying I don't have empathy for ANOHNI here, where the exhaustion at being scapegoated and blamed for bad, often bigoted backlash might drive someone into her state. But her very stately, blue-eyed soul delivery wallows in it, where despite how strikingly well-produced this parallel is and constructed to the past, given how narrow some of her framing can be, I'm not sure any tender attempt at populism will drive action. Now, for what it's worth, Jimmy Hogarth's production is beautiful. It's very textured. The arrangements once again saved the project in recreating that lush, expansive 70s soul. And I think there is a place where albums like this make sense, and they can feel relieving, where tenderness can be its own quiet revolution. And on tonal choice alone, I'd say this will get a broader audience. But it can also feel a little too indebted to the past, amplifying how so little has changed. That despair might only increase in retrospect, or go overlooked by those enamored by the old-fashioned tunes and who don't care about the lyrics. In the end, it's a fine listen, and for its niche, I think it succeeds. I hope it finds who will need it. I just think that niche is a little narrower in 2023, and while I know my own personal privilege gives me some distance from that weight, I don't know, I just prefer to get involved in the heavy lifting. Take it or leave it. We have from PJ Harvey, I Inside the Old Year Dying. It's been 7 years since PJ Harvey released an album. 7 years since the Hope 6 Demolition Project, where I had a lot of contentious opinions compared to Harvey's extensive and acclaimed back catalog. But that's also something of a lie. PJ Harvey's been working on some soundtrack work for a couple projects since, and last year wrote a novel-length narrative poem called Orlam Drenched in English Folklore, specifically drawing from old vernacular rooted in her hometown of Dorset. And this album feels like the tangled, challenging culmination of all of that, where PJ Harvey returns to the haunted, lilting delivery of white chalk, but enmeshed in jangling, haunted atmospherics somewhere between neo-folk, electroacoustic ambient music, and late-period Nick Cave. It's weird, and I mean that in the Shakespearean sense of the word, where PJ Harvey lifts poetic turns of phrase wholesale from Orlam, and then deliberately allows some double meanings to linger from near-extinct Dorset slang interweaving with modern English, as choppy acoustics, distant bells, subtle percussion, and electric guitar fragments spark and echo across the mist, creating this feel of a pastoral town living simultaneously in different ages across time. I'd almost call it childlike in its magical realism, if there wasn't so much underlying horror and nightmare fuel as some of the other thematic arcs from Orlam manifest in a primal blur of dark, yawning thresholds and gender bending and spectral figures pagan and divine, along with cycles of abuse and the brutal loss of feminine innocence, where a Civil War-era ghost with the name of Elvis looms large. Now, PJ Harvey has described this album as searching for meaning, the blinding passion of a first love. And I hear it, even if its discovery is goddamn harrowing and tragic for everyone involved. The sort of fairy tale where you're left wondering if the poet recognized just how truly dark this is. What also gets left by the wayside is a lot of the song structure and melodic hooks. Calling this a meditation is apt, giving the structured but free-flowing poetic meter and dreamlike sequencing, where even if you do translate the Dorset dialect, it feels more like a companion piece to Orlam on paper than a more focused album. In other words, it's definitely a personal passion project and will absolutely throw a lot of PJ Harvey fans that are looking for something more direct. I got other quibbles. The vocal mixing's a little slapdash, the Radiohead-esque electronic elements don't always blend that well, and it can also feel a little reserved, following PJ Harvey's odd tendency in recent years to hold everything slightly at a distance. And while that actually kind of works thematically here, it feels like another factor to hold immediate emotional resonance just further out of reach of the audience. But it's such a strange and unique and compelling listen that the literature nerd in me that ventures into unkempt wilderness kind of adores it regardless. You're going to hear little else like this in 2023. If it's not great, it's exceptionally close. Absolutely worth the listen. Check it out. We got from Hamish Hawk, Angel Numbers. So when a friend gives me a project and describes it as Spectrum Pulse Core, I was naturally skeptical, but I'll be damned if Hamish Hawk didn't impress me. A Scottish singer-songwriter at the intersection of Orville Peck, Alex Cameron, and Tennant from Zero, I was won over by the intricate, detailed, but remarkably emotive songwriting, Hawk's striking theatricality in his delivery, and some meticulously well-produced indie rock and chamber pop compositions that still went for the big climactic hooks. Now this is the follow-up to his 2021 breakout with a slightly more robust production budget. And you know, it's kind of odd. Where the biggest and most opulent songs, they still go for broke, they still kick ass, but there are fewer of them overall now as the project sprawls into odder, more self-referential singer-songwriter material, full of pedal steel, lush strings and horns, some chintzy keys, and a lot of musings on fame, delusions of grandeur, and succeeding in the music industry. It is very Alex Cameron in how the musical metatext intermingles with the romance that feels arguably more world-weary than I think he can credibly sell, especially when Hawk gets into his less impactful upper register. That being said, the production is way more colorful and balanced. The slow burn romantic moments are tastefully groovy, and they've got a literate flair that I really love. And when Hamish Hawk nails that balance, Think of Us Kissing and Elvis lookalike Shadows are gloriously magnetic in their wit and self-aware melodrama. Desperately is a savage deconstruction of its own swagger. Bill is a great reminder that even in his dreams, Bill Callahan is such a grounding force, and the whole love song Rest in Veneers is understated, damn near mundane to near perfection. So it's definitely an album carried by its strongest moments. It feels kind of uneven, ends on an oddly heavy note, but it's enough on the cusp of greatness that at its very best, I'll stick up for this. Check it out. We have from Swans, The Beggar. In retrospect, I should not be surprised that this is the Swans album that we got, especially following Leaving Meaning and all the questions of what ultimately remains after we pass from this world, in the meaning that we place in the art that we create, and how much time and societal upheaval will just fracture and distort it all. And all that matters is the primal experience. Now, my review framed that project as feeling very disjointed and nihilistic and an abstract postmodern way, but with The Beggar feeling more thematically focused on encroaching entropy, the inevitability of death, the wistful brutality of the realizations, they do feel more poignant. But I'll also say The Beggar feels more grounded in personal emotions. Michael Gira does not have the visceral power in his delivery that he once did, so sonically this is once again pulling from early 90s Swans like White Light from the Mouth of Infinity, but now with a little bit more from The Great Annihilator as well, especially with a cut like Los Angeles, City of Death. And at least on the first half, it does feel considerably better structured. The melodies cycle and crescendo more effectively. The choral vocals, lap pedal steel, climactic drums, and guitars both acoustic and electric bring a bluesier timbre while still feeling distinctly eerie with some of the flutes and the synths, and Michael Gira cycles through a broader range of emotionality that one might face at their very end. A slouching disgust at one's decay, genuine rage and sadness, regret from the debasements that we've indulged to keep on living, and a scream of loving rage for what we have denied ourselves. Oh, why can't I have what I want anytime I want? And then finally, a grim acceptance of the inevitable, and a curiosity to see whatever cosmic hell will come next. Swans have always been great at capturing transcendence, and it's just as true here. Now, the second half leans on drone and sound collage, with a single track running 43 minutes for those who have lived alongside this person clinging to the scraps of life, and then a smaller bonus cut reflecting on a full life lived with more finality. I mean, the length does make sense because for one begging and reaching at the end of one's life, what would have the most value but time itself? But in comparison to other Swans pieces that run this long, while conceptually I can appreciate all the ebbs and flows, it's not one that really sticks. I'm not going to revisit it much. But as a whole, I mean, I liked it more than Leaving Meaning. Conceptually, it feels more personal and immediate with stronger melodies. And while it does retrace some old Sonic territory, I would argue it's a much more satisfying manifestation of it. Definitely an album I'd be re-examining more in pieces than as a whole, and I would not put it among Swans' best, but as a career coda, especially for longtime fans, I think they stick the landing. Impressive stuff. Check it out. We have from Lil Uzi Vert, The Pink Tape. Okay, is anyone seriously coming to me for a take on Lil Uzi Vert? My frustration with them is that, while I get their appeal, the execution is never stuck. The production is sticky but feels perpetually unbalanced, lacking in groove, and awkwardly mixed on bloated albums. And for every extravagant, imaginative flair in the delivery or the content, there are so many facepalm-worthy moments. They're Trap's Billy Idol, and they're probably best for the festival-ready bangers and little else. So going rap rock does feel feel like a natural evolution of Uzi's sound, and yet we're left with a project that always seems like it's on the cusp of being something potent, but then slides back into everything that makes Uzi such a frustrating artist, at least on the albums. Now this can be split into two parts: the sticky, synth-inflected, lethargic trap and rage music, which remains as underwhelming for me as always because the bloated flexing, hedonism, and toxic relationships run together and become the worst thing melodrama can be. Boring. And then the rap rock experiments, borrowing from new metal that should hit way harder than they do because the guitars are never really allowed to explode, and where Uzi's hype beast presence feels almost peripheral to the songs that don't utilize them to their fullest extent, including a cover of System of a Down's Chop Suey that I don't think anyone needed. Now what's frustrating is that there's actually a surprising number of cuts that legit work, like Arca's production on Suicide Doors, or the guttural distortion on Amp, the jittery rage of X2, the cinematic wrestling flip on Nakamura, the nightmarish pitch down Fire Alarm. Werewolf would Bring Me the Horizon dropping the best bass line on the entire album, the chip tune of Pluto to Mars that kind of feels like a 2020 leftover, the glassy synth groove on Days Come and Go, Don Toliver really delivering on Patience, the rumbling guitars on Rehab. Honestly, the album ends on a high note with its more personal deep cuts. But then you get the bad Travis Scott verse on A, or an abysmal Nicki Minaj feature off the I'm Blue sample from Eiffel 65 on Endless Fashion, or just so many forgettable, abbreviated trap fragments with Uzi's shallow obnoxiousness, the stupid comparisons that they wind up making to their jewelry, or the panic at being perceived as gay that translates to some really overcompensating, insecure machismo that a non-binary rock star like them does not need to even validate or bring up. The bigots in parts of hip-hop don't want to understand or acknowledge any dimensions of queerness. Just keep on taking their bitches, they will understand that. So overall, look, it feels way too long, awkwardly sequenced, wildly uneven, but if this was streamlined into a tight half hour, it wouldn't be great, but the potential would have been better realized. It is better than I expected, it's got its moments, just as a whole, tough to recommend. So yeah, once again, thank you all so much for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I would be extremely grateful. As some of you already probably know, I put out my 10th year anniversary video just yesterday. If you guys want to go take a look at that, okay, maybe 2 days ago when this video goes live. Again, please go check that out. Put some decent amount of work in there. Also a little heartfelt on my end. You know how that goes. Beyond that, though, if you want to help support the channel, link to my Patreon is right over there. Also helps you get albums on my schedule and potentially join my Discord. And hey, the more the merrier is over there. I run a tight ship, but it tends to go pretty well. Beyond that, though, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And once again, I'm Mark. You're watching On the Pulse on Spectrum Pulse. And I'll see you next time.